Take a look at shares of NVIDIA up right now, 1 3/4%, up just about 7% for this week. This morning, coming off a monster session on Friday. Big moves to the upside on Friday. But longer term, the stock's been kind of treading water, underperforming the NASDAQ 100 and the broader S&P 500 over the past 2 months. But that could all change today when CEO Jensen Huang takes the spotlight at this year's CES show in Las Vegas, possibly reigniting investor excitement around this stock that stalled out quite a bit. Joining me now on this and much more is Joel Kalina, Managing Director and TMT Head at Wedbush Securities. Joel, good morning. Good to see you.
Frank, good morning.
All right, so a lot of excitement about Jensen Huang coming up at CES. I want to ask you, we're seeing the stock move higher in the pre-market. What could he say that isn't already priced into this stock? People have incredible estimates for growth. They have incredible expectations. So many people believe that this stock has a huge moat. What can he say to reaccelerate this trade?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a lot of moving parts to NVIDIA's story, but I think that I'll call it a frustration, as you kind of touched on earlier in the show. The stock just really hasn't done anything. It's trailed both Marvell and Broadcom by about 30% since the election, and so people really just been waiting for a catalyst, and the catalyst path really post their earnings in mid-November was there a little bit of a void there. But now here we are. People have had the keynote tonight at CES circled on their calendar for months now. And then beyond there, we get earnings in late February, and then we get GTC in March. But tonight, there's a lot of spec and expectations that maybe we're going to get Jensen teased a little bit in terms of the AI robotics strategy. Maybe we'll get some more granularity around the Blackwell ramp, which is upon us. He's also going to touch on gaming and some other aspects of the business. But clearly, the bulls want to hear just some color around how Blackwell's going so far, at least in terms of supply-demand goes.
He's offering an AI manifesto, and the reason why I say it's important is because a lot of people said, listen, he's talking about $80 billion in spend, so what? No, he's not. He's talking about the new industrial revolution, which is what you're going to hear tonight from Jensen. The new industrial revolution is such that you can't afford to not spend, not because you're worried about what other people are doing, but because it's so bountiful. And I think that one of the things that Jensen is going to talk about today are all the new use cases. It wouldn't surprise, this is tonight's CES talk. It wouldn't surprise me that we start hearing about robots. It wouldn't surprise me if we didn't hear a lot about Tesla. Tesla and self-driving car, Tesla and the neural network that is based on NVIDIA.
Yep. Tesla, Stiefel goes to 492 today. That's good to note.
That was a very interesting piece.
Yep. B of A, Jim, looks at what chip stocks did for CES last year on the 8th of January. NVIDIA was up 6% on the day.
Yeah, well, I think we also have this positive news about Han Hai, which we call Foxconn
revenue,
saying that things have accelerated there, and that helps NVIDIA, it helps Marvell. They talk about AMD, which has a keynote, by the way, Micron really soaring, linked also to Apple AI. I think that there'll be people who come out and say that, too, has been known. I find a lot of these things where people say that's known. I follow everything.
This is what you wrote this morning. This morning you wrote the bears will come in and say we knew that, but we didn't. That's what
I'm watching Frank Holland this morning, and I'm seeing these stocks pop, and I love watching Frank's show because you get the unmitigated tape, and it just, boom, it's just saying these things are up. And then I know that I read later, well, everyone knows this. Well, I didn't know it. No, I follow Han Hai really closely. Again, not like the Salesforce where I'm just saying these analysts don't know anything, but this is my life, okay? I wish my life were better and different. Like, I wish I were like an NFL coach / someone who got fired.
It's Black Monday.
Right, it is. But I come back and I say, well, look, we didn't really know that Foxconn was that strong. I mean, we didn't really know going in that Salesforce Agentforce is doing very well and that the ads that Matthew McConaughey ads, which, by the way, he wrote, are being very effective. I think that you have to drop your skepticism about things you know. Brad Smith, not talking about $80 billion, talking about how you have to spend billions just to be able to stay in the game because there's so much opportunity. Jensen Huang will be talking about how if you spend $1, you get 4 times, and he's going to give you the use cases.
Including NVIDIA trading above 150 for the first time since November. That would be an all-time closing high ahead of this big keynote from Jensen Huang tonight in Las Vegas. Christina Partsenevelos with details this morning. Hey, Christina.
Hi, Carl. Well, not including the big bump today, though. NVIDIA stock was trading sideways for the last 2 months. It was up about 3%, just keeping pace with the NASDAQ 100. But investors really just have been worried about several things. They're concerned about the portfolio shift from chips to software. They're nervous about China restrictions. There are company-specific worries like Blackwell chip delays. There are a lot of headlines around that, and then falling profit margins, even though we knew that was coming with gross margins. But CEO Jensen Huang aims to change that narrative with his keynote tonight. The key thing to watch, though, any details about Blackwell chip deliveries. That's the current GPU iteration. Back in November, Huang promised they'd ship more Blackwell platforms than originally planned this quarter, so we're looking for any updates on those numbers. Investors will also be looking for news about new variants of the Blackwell family with more AI memory coming out later this year, and whether the Rubin project, this is the next iteration of their GPU architecture that's set for 2026. There's some rumors maybe it'll come earlier. While AI, though, gets all the buzz, gamers should pay attention to. NVIDIA is expected to unveil its new 50 series graphics cards. In the keynote, there's also talk that NVIDIA might jump into the AI PC processor market, which would put them in direct competition with Qualcomm and Intel. So it's a lot of announcements I just went through, but it could help push NVIDIA back against those two big concerns we mentioned, which was one, the Blackwell delays, and then also there's been a lot of talk about competition from custom chip makers like Marvell and Broadcom. So look out for the keynote tonight. And also important, Sarah, would be the analyst Q&A tomorrow afternoon, where we'll probably get more details about the financial target. So that's tomorrow around 3:30 Eastern time. Sarah?
Got it. Well, the stock is running up in anticipation, 4.6% right now. Christina, thank you. Our next guest says, while Jensen will celebrate a great year for NVIDIA, he's unlikely to get into any specific financial projections until the analyst meeting scheduled for tomorrow. D.A. Davidson analyst Gil Loria joins us now with a hold rating, $135 price target on the stock. Why are you still so cautious, Gil?
Well, NVIDIA is about to have a record year, an amazing year, and that's a lot of what Jensen Huang is going to talk about tonight. The question, as Christina is indicating, is more about, is this sustainable? Can they grow again next year? For the stock to continue to go up, not only does it have to deliver this record year, it has to keep growing into the next year and the year after that. And that really depends on AI tools progressing and creating value for the customers, for Microsoft, Amazon, and Google's customers, to justify those three companies buying more and more NVIDIA chips past this year. So that's the big question, is what happens?
But even if we don't get an answer to that question, aren't they still buying and buying and buying? Aren't they still continuing to spend billions and billions of dollars, and that benefits NVIDIA?
That's right. And Microsoft has given an indication that at least for the balance of their fiscal year, which goes through June, they're going to keep buying these chips. But they've also, if you listen carefully to what Satya Nadella said in a recent podcast, he also talked about the fact that he's no longer chip constrained, that they're now evaluating their CapEx going forward. So as soon as July, he may say something along the lines of, we've invested enough CapEx in data centers, we may want to slow down the rate of investment, or maybe even just maintain it. And since he's NVIDIA's largest customer, that would be a signal to the other customers to maybe do the same thing. That's what we'd be looking out for from NVIDIA's customers. But in terms of today, the news is going to be great. Tomorrow, they're going to have an analyst event, and maybe they can give us something past this quarter. NVIDIA only gives guidance one quarter at a time. Tomorrow, they have an opportunity to give us a full year guidance, maybe longer term guidance. That's what we're going to be listening for.
That's interesting, Gil. When you think about lines along the lines of from a customer, what are the phrases that you'll be looking for or listening for tonight?
New applications, new success stories, new use cases, things that are actually creating value to customers. There's a lot of value already being created in AI for self-driving cars for Tesla, for better ad delivery from Meta. But beyond that, we need to see more companies like Salesforce being successful with Agentforce. If Salesforce accelerates growth this year based on delivering new AI agents, we'll get better visibility into these tools actually justifying this incredible level of investment. We need to hear more of that both tonight and over the coming months to know that this investment is worthwhile and that we haven't been over-investing.
We are also really still pumped up, though. I want people to know on NVIDIA and Broadcom, we obviously said that right up front as well. So certainly not going to rob the enthusiasm of those guys. A lot of the things that the AI leaders are doing, though, will create a halo effect, and I think Cisco gets dragged up.
Speaking of NVIDIA, what's on the line tonight? What do you want to hear?
Well, what I think is Jensen is a market creator. So what we love about NVIDIA is they create markets. This whole thing about market share with them is kind of silly. Jensen creates markets. He creates platforms where people can develop applications and then explode on the scene. And one thing we wrote about today in our Outlook piece, which I hope all our clients look at, is the Trump policies that actually curb immigration and tariffs are going to actually accelerate the adoption of AI, because folks are going to want to look for new ways to find labor and increase productivity to offset some other things. So tonight, we expect him to unveil some of his robotics vision, a platform that can create physical labor for many folks, perhaps some other things that you can do on the consumer arena. So we think we'll talk about robotics, and he's a market maker there. He'll create a platform where companies can create robots. Then I expect him to talk about accelerated PCs and some of the gaming initiatives that he has, which are pretty darn exciting. It's just a lot smaller than some of the big stuff in the data center. So I think it's pretty neat. He's coming tonight. I'm going to be listening very closely. I think it's probably good for the long term.
Board Tech is leading. NVIDIA is a big reason why today's stock up near 5%, Joe. One of the biggest questions in the market has been centering around NVIDIA, whether it is going to get jump-started once again. Now, of late, it has. And Jensen Huang usually delivers. And we'll see if he does tonight out in Vegas, 6:30 Eastern time is the big keynote that we are all watching. Everybody on the show today, by the way, owns this stock.
Good. I'm glad that they do, because it's going to continue to go higher. It's going to take out the all-time high at 152.89. That's certainly where it's heading. The news that we heard last evening from Foxconn surrounding revenue growth being stronger than expected, that obviously speaks towards strong demand in data centers, and it speaks towards a ramp up in Blackwell. So I expect nothing short of a very optimistic address this evening from Jensen Huang. I think that will power the stock higher. And I think what's good about what we've witnessed here today is that we're seeing other semiconductor names finally participate, because let's remember, they fell asleep except for Broadcom and NVIDIA. They sat out the end of 2024 on the sidelines, and now they've come back once again.
Well, Bryn, they're strong because of Foxconn today and those record revenues. So we are getting a big day from the chips. If you look more recently, though, if we're talking about, what NVIDIA is capable of doing in this early part of the new year, the way that it finished 24 would leave a lot to be desired. I mean, certainly when you put it next to a Broadcom, for example, if you say in the last 2 months, NVIDIA up 4% over that period of time, Broadcom up 31. Now, of late, it's obviously been a different story. As Joe was talking about, NVIDIA is poised to close above 150 for the first time since November. It's erased the 13% drawdown that it had in November and December. And oh, by the way, for a story that we talk so much about, market cap-wise with NVIDIA and Apple on the doorstep of $4 trillion, well, don't look now, but NVIDIA is right on the heels, once again, of Apple when it comes to market cap.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you stretch your chart out and go back just 1 year, NVIDIA is up 200% and Broadcom's up 122. So I think just that moment in time, the last 6 months, yeah, it hasn't done anything. But if you look back just a year, it's up a two-bagger. And so I think that, what you're seeing is you continue to see both Broadcom and NVIDIA really attract so much investor capital. I think that's going to continue. I think within the Mag 7, I was saying this last week, the one name that there's clear line of sight for earnings this year is NVIDIA. I mean, you could say that for Broadcom as well, but we're talking about NVIDIA. And I think where people forget is we call NVIDIA a chip company. This is a technology ecosystem. They do hardware, they do software, they do InfiniBand. And so it's like the whole collective within this AI ecosystem. And then you have, Microsoft coming out last week doing an $80 billion spend. And then you have Jensen tonight. I just think the stars are lining up where you had a company with digestion the last 6 months, but I think the numbers are going to be strong. And so I think the people that got shaken out of the name because it didn't do anything for a few months are probably going to regret that.
Not much new, Weiss, when you talk about like this kind of an event.
Yep.
Jensen speaking at CES, the keynote. Bank of America has taken a look back at what normally happens to the stock when he speaks.
Yep.
At CES, they call it a, quote, monstrous Monday. So it was up 6.4% last year going into the speech. It rallied on Tuesday and Wednesday following. And here we find ourselves once again with all these questions about NVIDIA, whether it can continue to live up to the tremendous hype that's around the name. Does he remind us tonight that, oh, yes, it can? And this is a place you want to continue to be and be big.
Yeah, so the answer is yes, I think he can, and that's been the pattern. No reason to believe that it won't happen. Look, the canary in the coal mine is competition coming, but that's not today. So while we're seeing massive spend on building a competitive chip so that Microsoft, Apple, Meta, you name it, not entirely dependent on NVIDIA, and eventually that will bring down costs. They're not going to stop this iteration of the chip, but that's tomorrow's news. And when I say tomorrow, I mean much longer than tomorrow. Maybe it's next year, maybe the year after, because in addition to developing the chip, you also have to have capacity, and that capacity would have to come from Taiwan Semi, and they don't have the capacity. So there's no reason not to believe, with the growth in AI, which again is the fastest adopted technology in the history of the world, that growth won't continue. So you had a nice reset in NVIDIA, and I do think it continued to work. And basically, I think all of tech that worked last year can work this year.
Well, especially, Jimmy, when you have expectations, for example, of, CNBC's own reporting of Microsoft expected to spend $80 billion on data centers in fiscal 25. All of the hyperscalers are tripping over themselves to spend as much as they can on data center, to buy these chips, the likes of which NVIDIA sells. That doesn't look to be slowing anytime soon to any meaningful degree. And even if it does slow, you're still slowing from such dramatically high levels that by the time it filters down to all of the other competitors that are alleged to exist and will theoretically at some point threaten the dominance of NVIDIA, at least to some degree, that seems to be ways off.
I completely agree, Scott. This coming year, this coming fiscal year, it looks like NVIDIA, at least if you trust the analysts as compiled by FactSet, is going to earn $107 billion in net income. Just to put that into perspective, that's a micron. That's what they're going to earn this year. Now, we can play the numbers game all along, but what you're saying is absolutely right. The growth rate shows no sign of slowing. The estimates are predicting multi-year growth of 42%. I don't think that will last, that you'll get 42% over the next 3 years. But at a 42% growth rate, are you with us? You need to take a break? You good?
He's got a phone call coming in.
Yeah, it's Jensen Huang. Anyway, look, the PEG ratio on NVIDIA is 0.8. So people who are looking at this from a valuation perspective and saying, I don't want to own it at 32 times forward earnings, you're really missing the picture that is actually cheap relative to the growth rate that's there. I also want to point out, Scott, because you brought up the hyperscalers, it's absolutely appropriate. $80 billion is a lot of money, and that's just Microsoft. Michael Semblis did this analysis last week of all of the incremental spend that's going into data centers right now. In order for the hyperscalers to get their traditional margins on that, they're going to have to increase revenue 400 to 500 billion. And the top 5 have about 100 billion right now in revenues from those data centers. So I think what we're seeing here is that in the immediate sense, NVIDIA is the beneficiary of AI, not the hyperscalers. That will come later.
It has been a stock moving event, right? I mean, not just on the Monday that he delivers the address either. You've seen it on the Tuesday and the Wednesday following, and this comes at a time where the stock really seems to need a jump.
Precisely. And that's why I put emphasis on tomorrow, because I'm sure the analyst community will ask more specific questions about Blackwell. My assumption is that in the keynote, it will focus more on gaming, maybe Spectrum X, which is their Ethernet cables, very important to bring all of those GPU clusters together. But all of the information that the world wants, investors want, is how are they going to move forward and get that continuous source of revenue and stay, 1 to 2 years in advance of every other competitor out there. So those those are the questions. China restrictions too. Those are the questions they're going to get from analysts tomorrow afternoon, and where you should start to see some movement in the stock, depending on what sentence he happens to say. And it's going to be broadcast live, so everybody can watch it as well. And I'll obviously be following it for our audience tomorrow afternoon.
All right, 6 hours to go till we see Jensen Huang. Christina, thank you. Christina Partsinevelos. Now let's bring in Trivariate Research's Adam Parker. He's also a CNBC contributor, is out with his 25 outlook this year, but of course used to be a semi-analyst in your prior days. Good to see you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Scott. Good to see you.
You have AI-related semis as a key part of your market story for 2025, don't you?
Yes. And I know you always accuse me of being a little bit biased toward the background in semis, but that's true. I like semis over software right now, and I know a lot of clients are out at CES waiting and hanging on every word, just like Christina just said. So it's a big event. I think Jensen will outline a lot of applications and get people excited again, as he usually does when he goes out and talks to the street.
I do find it interesting that NVIDIA gets this big, kind of almost forced mechanical bid as new index money comes into the market. We'll see if it comes through after CES and if it's more than just, let's find the stocks that haven't moved much yet on the familiar themes.
Michael, I'm looking at NVIDIA here as we approach the close today, because 148.88. Above that would be a new record closing high. We are at 149, so we are right there. A handful of hours before Jensen Huang gives his keynote at CES in Las Vegas, which has been a stock-moving event.
It has, and try a little bit of front running. It's interesting. I mean, you've had dozens of new record highs in the S&P 500 since NVIDIA decisively went up into the 140s. Actually, it cracked above 140 in June of last year. So the big question is, did the market lose its ability to keep rallying on basically the same observations and the same news about the AI investment story, or is this just kind of letting fundamentals catch up to the valuation? Valuation itself, in NVIDIA terms, doesn't look super demanding anymore. It's like in the mid-30s forward multiple, not that different from Microsoft and Apple. So it'll be interesting. I think that's a test of the market's willingness, to believe that there really is an aggressive new uptrend here.
All right, I hope you're all doing great today and that your new year is off to a great start. The S&P finished the day about 0.5% higher, and NVIDIA had a great day, closing about 3.4% higher on the day. Of course, NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang is scheduled to speak at CES tonight at 6:30 Pacific, 9:30 Eastern. Normally, when we have a catalyst event such as this, I would be wary of traders buying the rumor and selling the news. But here's the thing, we actually have multiple events back-to-back, because right after Jensen's keynote tonight at CES, we have 2 more events immediately following. Tomorrow morning, there is a fireside chat with JP Morgan at 8 a.m. Pacific, and then a CES Financial Analyst Q&A at 12:30 Pacific, 3:30 Eastern. You should be able to listen to both of these events live tomorrow by going to NVIDIA's Investor Relations website. Then go to Events and Presentations and click Listen to Webcast at the appropriate time. Jensen's comments tonight, as well as his comments tomorrow, are likely to be market-moving, so get ready for some potential volatility in NVIDIA stock and therefore the broader market over the next 24 hours. Regardless of what happens in the short term, I seriously think the long-term thesis around NVIDIA and the build-out of AI infrastructure is intact. I've noticed that a lot of analysts and market participants have turned somewhat sour toward NVIDIA over the past couple of months. But the reality is that we haven't really had any events to look forward to during that time. But now things are starting to pick up. We have CES today and tomorrow, NVIDIA earnings on February 26th, and NVIDIA's GTC on March 17th through the 21st. And of course, underlying all of these events is the production ramp of Blackwell. I really think that the quarters NVIDIA reports earnings for in May and August have the potential to be very, very good as Blackwell ramps. And I think many market participants are starting to come to that realization. Hyperscalers are still spending billions. NVIDIA has a massive competitive moat that stretches across the entire stack, both hardware and software. And we have a clear product roadmap from NVIDIA for 2025 and 2026. As long as everything remains peaceful in the Pacific, and as long as none of the hyperscalers significantly reduce their capex, then I think NVIDIA should be just fine for at least the next 1 to 2 years. With all of that being said, I hope you all have a great rest of the day and a fantastic 2025, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about NVIDIA in the comments below. Please leave a like on this video so more people will see it. And while you're down there, please consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.